Do you have something that's happened to you in life where maybe you think it's a failure and maybe the memory of that is significant? Today, we're going to talk about how to reframe failures and use them to our advantage. Welcome to Everyday A New Thought. I'm Thor Chalgren. Today, I want to talk about how we can reframe things in our life that we may see as supposed failures. This story for me begins years and years ago when I was a teenager, and I had been in Boy Scouts for a long time, and I advanced all the way to the point where I was one badge away from becoming an Eagle Scout, which is a fairly significant deal. I think less than 5% of all Boy Scouts ever reach that level. And for me, I was probably a couple of merit badges and a service project away from being Eagle Scout. But things in high school got in the way. I started to do other things that were more interesting to me, and I just never finished it. And to be honest, that's something I regretted for the longest time. And it allowed me to develop this story about myself that I was in some way a quitter, that I couldn't finish things, that I could start things, but I wouldn't finish them. And whenever I would think about that story, I would go back to that time and go, see, it's just like that time that I didn't get Eagle Scout. Fast forward years later to a time in my life when I had a writing career and I had gone to film school, to graduate school to develop this career. And this is something I probably spent 10 years in this line of work, 3 years in graduate school. So I had an expectation that this was going to be a path for me where I would have success. In writing, there's a tool that you have called foreshadowing. You're probably familiar with this. It's this idea that early in the story, something is going to be set up that will pay off later on. If something big is going to happen, then they'll set it up earlier on so that it creates interest. And when you get to that big event later on, you can look back and go, they set it up before. If Darth Vader turns out to be Luke's father, there are going to be events and conversations that happen earlier in that movie or a previous movie in Star Wars, for instance, where you talk about who Luke's father was. So that would be foreshadowing, setting up something that happens later on. Well, it occurs to me that we can use that same idea of foreshadowing, and instead of it in a story context, we can think of it in our life context. In my case, maybe I can look back at those moments of what I would think of as failures, and I can see that maybe they were foreshadowing for what I would do later in life. Instead of thinking of them as failures, I can think of them simply as a time in my story where I was doing things that would be important to later in my story. And I'll give you a couple of examples. In the work that I did in graduate school at UCLA, there were skills that I developed there: how to work with other people, how to give and receive feedback, how to work in a workshop setting. Those are things that I use today. I also made many friendships and relationships that are meaningful to me today. I would say also, as a storyteller, the things and skills that I developed then are ones that I use today in a different way, but absolutely, that's something that I used in the past. So if I look at that and go, you know what, it didn't turn out the way I expected, but what if that was foreshadowing for something that I was going to do later in life? I think this is important because there are a lot of times where we can look back at something and we can say that it was a failure. But what if instead it's just a success that you haven't yet realized? So if you find something that there's a point in your life where you look at it and you say, God, you know what, I failed at that, or I didn't succeed in the way I wanted. Maybe instead ask, is that foreshadowing for something that you are yet to do, some success that you will have in the future? And if you look at that past event and just go, I don't know why that happened, but I trust that at some point in my life, that skill, that relationship, that moment in time will be used for something future in my life. And therefore, instead of a failure, it's simply foreshadowing. Thank you so much for watching the show today. I appreciate you being here. If you like this episode, please hit like and subscribe to the channel. That way, every day when there is a new episode of Every Day a New Thought, you'll receive that episode. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.